Hello and welcome to the 11th tutorial on CSS. Today we'll talk about CSS Sprites, some filters, the nth, and Parallax. So when we talk about sprites, we are not talking about the soda, and we're actually talking about a means of combining multiple images into a single image file for use on a website or to help with performance. So let's choose this picture. Let's choose this picture of some peacocks. Here we go. And so its name is pic.jpg. And so, as you know, we can crop pictures or we can size pictures differently using Photoshop or Paint or any other software for graphic stuff. And so CSS, however, actually has a way of doing that without having to use any software. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll make a div. So we're going to type in div and we're going to close our div, and let's give our div ID =, 2 quotation marks, and let's write sprites. And so let's change it up using our CSS code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a hashtag as it's an ID, and I'm going to type in sprites. And now let's give it background and URL, and it is called pic.jpg. So I'm going to type in pic.jpg, and let's also give it width and height properties. So width, and let's make this 300 pixels for example, and let's also add in height of 250 pixels. And so now when we save and refresh our page, and let's now save and refresh our page, and so its name is picture.jpg. By the way, you should also use this structure. And so now when we save and refresh, we get the designated amount of my picture. So we have 300 width and 250 height. And what we can do is we can click on inspect, and we can make this a little bit smaller, and you can see what the exact sizes are of your picture by doing this. And you can do the same thing for height. And so for my picture, and so for my picture, the width is 643 and the height is 412. And so just so you know, and so let's say our objective was to, let's find our picture. And so let's say our objective is to split this into 3 equal parts. And so imagine if we split it like this, and from the middle, and there's a bottom part as well. And so what we need to do for that is we need to measure out our correct measurements. And so for me it's these. You can either right click and click on properties to see the full width and height, or you can just use inspect. And so if we divide 412 by 3, it's roughly 137 as we're rounding it, so 137 pixels. And so now let's add 2 more divs, and let's change it to sprite 1 and sprite 2. And when I save and refresh, as you can see, I get the measurements that I've put in my code. So the height is 137, however the width is full, which is 643. So sprite is basically my top part of the picture. And so now let's make a sprite 1. So change this with 1. And we're going to put the exact same measurements, so yours could be different, as your picture could be a totally different picture. I don't know, you can just mess around and see what's what. And let's also make a sprite 2, which is my third div. And so let's add to all of them position absolute, position, here we go. And so the first div basically starts at 0, 0, which is basically the very top, and from the left it's just 0. So imagine like coordinates. And so we don't need to add anything to this. However, for sprite 1, let's add in a top property, and let's give it 145 pixels. So it should start 145 pixels into my picture. And now when I save and refresh, you can see I have this now. And for sprite 2, let's add in top 282 pixels, 282 pixels. And now when I save and refresh, we get something like this, which is very wrong. So to make it look actually right, what I'm going to do in sprite 1, I'm going to add after my background, I'm going to add 0, so that's from the left, and I'm going to add minus 137 pixels. And for sprite 2, I'm going to do the same thing essentially. However, I'm going to make it to 272 pixels minus. And so let's save and refresh, save, refresh, and we get our full picture. And so if I click on inspect, we can see that these are actually 3 different divs, just like we wanted them to be. So this is our first div, so the top part, the second one is our middle parts, and the third one is our bottom parts. And so let's also just add in some animation to our picture. So let's add in our keyframes. Keyframes, sprite, and you can give it any name that you like. I'm just making a sprite so it will be easier for you to understand. So this is going to be our very first div, this one. And let's open and close our curly braces, and let's add some spaces, and let's also make these right, so give them a nice structure. Here we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in from, and I'm going to add in curly braces again, and inside of them I'm going to write left colon, and the first one is going to be 700 pixels. And let's duplicate this, but let's change from to 2, and let's give left 0. And so we need to add this animation to our sprite selector. So that is the first one, as I mentioned. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in animation sprites. I'm going to make it 3 seconds and linear. So now when I save and refresh, I get an animation on my very first div, as you can see, and it only lasts for 3 seconds. Next up, let's also add in an animation for our second sprite, which is sprite 1. Here we go, and let's change this to sprite 1. And let's also change some of its values. And let's change this 700 pixels to a minus, so it will be from the other direction. And in our sprite 1, let's add in animation sprite 1, 3 seconds, and also linear. Save and refresh, and as you can see, from the left we get the second animation, which is our second div, so sprite 1. And let's do the same thing for sprite 3 as well. So let's do the same thing for sprite 2 as well. So let's copy, paste, and let's change this to sprite 2. And let's also keep the same values, so 700 pixels. And in our sprite 2, we're going to add animation, and I spelt it wrong, animation, and same thing, so sprite 2, 3 seconds, and linear. Save and refresh, and here we have our animated picture. And so what we can do is, you saw the bottom and the top parts coming from the same direction at the same time. So what I can do, I can just delete this. And for sprite 2 here, I can delete the 2, so it will be this. So this will affect my sprite 2, and it will just essentially be the same thing as you can see here. And let's change the 700 values to 300. And now when I save and refresh, as you can see, it comes to 300 pixels on my page. And so as you saw, it didn't exactly stop at its ending point, which is the 300 pixels. So what we can do is we can add another property, which is animation fill mode. And I can make its value forwards. So now when we save and refresh, my picture will stop at 300 pixels, which we can't exactly see because my window is a little bit too small. And here we go, as you can see, it kind of stopped at 300 pixels when we add 300 pixels from the left. So the 2 parts, and I can copy this, and let's put it also for this one and for this one as well. And let's add in our semicolons. Now save and refresh, and here we go. As you can see, it stopped at 300 pixels, and I can make my page a little bit bigger for you to see. Never mind. And so instead of just putting this whole property with its big value, what we can do is we can get rid of it, and we can just put the word forwards in our animation property. And so save and refresh, and the same thing will happen. And yeah, that's basically it on our sprites. And so let's move on to talking about CSS filters. these are basically the definition of visual effects like blur, saturation, contrast, etc., grain, whatever, which is often used with the img tag, just like I have here. And so this is a picture of a random car, the Tesla, and so we're going to give this picture some filters. So go ahead and insert your image and add in an ID as well, and you can name it anything that you'd like. I've named it img1 and I've given it width 400 pixels just so it fits my page so you can see it. And now what I'm going to do in my CSS code, I'm going to give it some properties. So the first thing I'll do is I'll type in a hashtag img and 1 as the ID is img1. And let's give it the very first filter, which is going to be filter blur. And we can also give it the amount that we want it to be blurred. So 5 pixels, this should blur it properly. And now let's save and refresh, and as you can see it blurs my picture. So when I click on inspect, I can show you what it will look like if it's at 0, 1, any value that we like. And as you can see, this is basically just blurred everything out. And this is it at 0, so this is its normal value. And you can also go into minuses, which won't exactly do anything to your picture. Now let's comment on this as we don't need it. Here we go. And let's type in filter brightness. So this will change the brightness of my picture. And let's give its value 200%. And we're just trying different things out here. Here we go. As you can see, my picture got brighter. And using inspect again, change it. And so we can also comment on this, and let's add in another filter, which is filter contrast. So this is like when you edit your pictures or things with apps on your phone. You can do this exact same thing with CSS. So let's type in 200% once more. And let's save, refresh, and as you can see it got a little bit darker because of the contrast. And here we go, using our inspect we can change it up. And so here we go, here is our contrast, and using our inspect elements we can change its value to whatever we like. So I can put in 0, so I can change it to anything that I like essentially. Here we go, and yeah, etc. And let's also comment on this. Here we go, and let's add in drop shadow. And its values we're going to put 8 pixels, 8 pixels, and 10. And also add in red, and we need to have these in brackets. And so the next thing is box shadow, and its values are going to be 8 pixels, 8 pixels, 10 pixels, and red, just so we can see it clearly. And here we go. Here is our box shadow. This is how it should be written, and as you can see, we have now our red shadow. And next, let's also comment on this. And let's type in filter grayscale, and if we put it to 100%, we'll basically get our black and white picture. So here we go. As you can see, our picture turned into a black and white picture, a vintage picture, as you can see. And we can change grayscale to hue rotate, and let's give it degrees, so let's say 90 degrees here. And this was misspelled, it's like this. And now when I save, refresh, as you can see, it's sort of a tint to the greenish side. And I can also comment on this, and we can talk about filter invert to 100%. So I'm pretty sure you know what this is. It inverts all of the colors, and as you can see, our picture is now inverted. And to get transparency, we use opacity, which is this. And let's change it to 30%. Save and refresh, and as you can see, we got a 30% transparency in our picture. And so 100 is the full, so our original picture, as you can see. And yeah, we can also change this to saturate, so it basically saturates the picture. And I can give it the value 8, save and refresh, and here we go. Here we have our saturated picture. You can mess around with, inspect, and see which one suits your picture best. And one more thing that we can do is we can use contrast and brightness together. So we can type in filter, contrast, 200%, and brightness 100%, let's say, or 150 even. And now when I save and refresh, I have both my contrast and brightness filters working on my picture. And so the default value for filter is none. So that is this basically. And to get back to our original picture, we save and refresh, and we get our original picture back. And so let's move on. So instead of our pictures, what we can do is we can do the same thing with divs. So let's get rid of this, we don't need it, and let's add in a div. So div, and let's give it ID dv1 for example, and let's also add lorem ipsum to it, which is basically some random text for here, as it says, it's dummy text, and it's for like graphic designers and programmers, etc. And you can generate it through this website, or you can get an extension on your Notepad or your Chrome browsers. And so I can type in, let's say, 40 words and generate lorem ipsum. And here is my text, copy, and let's insert that into here. Here is my lorem ipsum text, and let's also give it some properties in our CSS code internal style sheet. And I'm going to give it animation basically, so basically doing the filter thing again. So keyframes dv1, and we're going to give it these values. So this is what we're going to add in with our keyframes dv1. And let's get rid of this one, we don't need it, and we can just name it dv. And let's also give some properties to our dv1 selector, and inside let's write animation dv 5 seconds, so it will last for 5 seconds, and we can put infinite so it won't end basically. And now when I save and refresh, and we need to add in our semicolons here. Now save and refresh, and I made a mistake here, so infinite, save, refresh, and so put in animation dv5s, so 5 seconds, and when we save, refresh our page, we get our text to do this. And as you can see, all the text is spreading out, so word spacing, that's what it's used for. And we can also give it another value, which is 4 words, and there's also infinite as well, so it goes on forever and ever. However, this one will stop at 80 as it is the last property, if you know, it's the last value, if you know what I mean. And so now when I save and refresh, it will only stop when it gets to 80 pixels, as you can see here. And now let's move on and let's talk about the nth topic. Let's talk about the nth element. So let's get rid of everything one more time. Here we go, we don't need this, and we're going to talk about the nth. And we're going to talk about this nth element. So basically this is a CSS pseudo class, as we learned in one of our old lessons, and it matches one or more elements of a given type based on their position among a group of siblings. So that possibly made no sense. However, you will understand it once we get to it, once we get to doing it here. So once you've deleted everything, go ahead and make this table. So you should make something like this, and so have this structure as well. And so my table is made up of 5 data cells and 4 table rows, so that makes us go up to 20. So now when I save and refresh, we get something like this. So please go ahead and do this too. So please go ahead and do this as well. And so in CSS, the nth child is used to select, let's say, so the nth child is used to select things, just to make it clear for you. So in our style area, what we're going to do is we're going to type in our tr, and then a dot, and then nth child. And let's make it 1. So the value is going to be 1. So first column, so the first batch of 5, if that makes sense. And now let's give it background, and let's make it pink, for example. And so now when I save and refresh, so it should look like this: tr colon nth child, and then your value. And now when I save and refresh, my first column is now pink. And if we change 1 with 2, it's the same thing, but it's going to be the second one. And you can change it to 3 and 4, and however many rows you have. And so let's comment on this, and let's change it to even, and let's make our background linen or any other color. Now when I save and refresh, and so as you can see, the even columns, so the even numbers got the value, and in this case it's not exactly the even numbers, it's the even number of our table columns. So if I put it to odd, it will be the other way around basically, and here we go. And we can also change odd with 2n plus 2, so that is 2 plus 2, the second plus 2, here we go, so the second one plus 2, and you can change its values and stuff. And there's also something called nth last of type, so let's do that right now, and let's type in nth last of type. Value is 4, for example, and background purple, let's say, and this will be from the bottom up basically. So let's save, refresh, and this is this, and yeah, so that's basically it on our nth element. And let's move on to something completely different, which is going to be parallax. So parallax is right now a website trend amongst all of the big websites, and it's something that's put in the background. It's like a 3D element, and this is when the content is moved at a different speed than the foreground content while scrolling. And you can also have borders and different. And so just so you have a better understanding, so imagine these are your eyes. You get the first barrier, which is the most noticeable, so the thing that you can definitely see, and then there's like a second border and a third border and so on. And here we have everything explained in a diagram, so the barriers and the projectors, the screen, and yeah, so if it doesn't really make sense, you'll get to have a better understanding by the end of this lesson. So I'm going to ask you to make this structure of divs. So we basically have this first div class, and inside of it is our group 1. So this is our group 1. Group 1 has 2 layers, so basically we have the layer base and the layer front. And group 2 also has 2 layers, layer base and layer back. So we are going to have 3 layers, which is going to be like the top layer, the middle layer and the bottom layer. The most visible one will be the top layer, and a little bit less will be middle, and bottom next. So now let's give it some CSS properties. So first of all, let's type in our body selector, and for body let's also add an HTML. Let's just give everything some margins. So I'm going to add in margin 0, we don't need any margins just yet, and padding also 0, and I'm gonna also add in some properties for, and I'm also going to add in some properties for my parallax. So for the first thing that we'll do is we'll give its height 100 VH, and let's also give it perspective, which is basically the sort of like the deepness, like how thick it will be if you look at it from the side, and this will be 300 pixels. And let's add in overflow Y, so coordinates, so horizontal and vertical, and let's give Y auto, and let's also make overflow X, and let's give this hidden, and let's also give it a background color, so background, make it cadet blue. And now when I save and refresh, as you can see, I now have my cadet blue background, and I have my divs right here. And so what we can do is we can type in also, let's also keep the structure, and we can type in layer dot layer, open and close your curly braces, and inside of them we can give its position absolute here, and from every direction we'll give it 0 value. So from the top it will be 0, from the bottom it will also be 0, left and right. So from every direction we give it the 0 value, and so this will basically just clash, and as you can see everything overflows and is on top of each other, which is basically our first layer. And I can also add in layer back, and I can give this selector a something completely different, which is transform translate Z, so from a specified direction, which is our Z direction, so Z direction, and 300 pixels. And now when we save and refresh, our text, so our second text will be in the back. So this is the layer back as we just wrote it down, and it's now further away from our first layer, so it's sort of like the second layer, and it's going in the Z direction, which is further back, further to the back. Using our inspect element, we can change our layer back values. So here I can change any of my values, and we get our second layer right here, and we can add in our scale property as well. and I can give it the value 2. And when we save, refresh, you can see that it is now also overflowing right here. And let's move on. And so just before here, let's also add in layer base. And inside, let's write transform translate z and the 0 value, so we don't want anything happening with that. And now let's move on and let's make our layer front value. Layer front selector, here we go, and let's write transform, let's give it translate z, and let's give it a value which is 90 pixels, and let's also add in the scale, which is going to be 0.667, which I checked through inspect. Now when I save, refresh, we still get the same overflown thing. And to move on, let's type in title, and let's write font size, make it 200%. Font size 200%. Text align, center, width 100%, let's say. Position absolute. And from the top, let's give it 50, so it will be 50% using from the top of our page, if that makes sense, and 50% from the left. However, we also need to add our transform property, and let's type in translate, and let's give it a value which is going to be minus 50%, comma, minus 50%. So now when we save, refresh, we get our text in the middle, and we get it in its layers. So we have 3 layers, and we got all of our properties in the right order, in the right order, working on our web page for our parallax. And to move on, let's give some of our groups some classes. So group, I made an error here, group, here we go, and let's write in position relative, so this, and let's add in a transform style, preserve 3D, and when we add this,
տեսնել մեր edge-ի խորությունը։ Ավելացնենք նաև transition, transform.
And to it, let's also add in transition, transform dot 5s, which is 5 seconds, and let's also add in height, which is going to be 130 VH. Now save, refresh. So now when I scroll up and down, you can see the different speeds that they're scrolling in. they're being moved in, basically. And this is because of our properties. So to have the second group, so to have the groups in different positions, we can type in our group 1 property, which class actually with a dot here, don't forget, and we're going to write z index 3. And let's also copy this, paste it, change this with group 2, and let's also change its value to 2. So this means that group 2 will now be above group 1. And now let's give our group 1 layer base some properties, which is going to be group 1 dot layer base, and let's give it background aqua here. And now when I save and refresh, we get our aqua base with our cadet blue, obviously. And now let's just copy this and give some properties to our group 1 layer back, and let's just change the color to, let's say, deep pink. Save, refresh, we now get our deep pink over here. And so here we go, here it is with our first base. Preserve 3D, here we have it. As you can see, the transition, and here we have our 3D parallax for our group 2 layer base. And yeah, you can change some other things and just mess around with parallax to find a better understanding of. And yeah, that was it for today. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.